In high school, my best friend did amateur modeling, which was very popular with the girls at my school, and she would usually connect with photographers through her Instagram. One day, she was over at my house and showed me the profile of the photographer who had messaged her. It was a guy 10 years older than her, and when he messaged her, she assumed it was for modeling. He replied saying that she could model for him, but he would much rather take her out on a date. My friend disclosed how she was 17, and he said it wasn't a big deal to him if it wasn't for her. And when she told me this, red flags went off in my mind. But she brushed it off saying that age wasn't a huge factor for her either, and that her parents had a bit of an age gap as well. Fast forward. This guy says he's going to Colorado for a photo shoot and that he would love to meet up with her sometime when he got back in town. She talked to him for months, keeping me updated on how she really liked him. When I checked out his profile, it was filled with photography, but barely any pictures of his face included. My friend wasn't going to change her mind though, and as her friend I shared my opinions, but I also respected her decisions, as she's usually pretty level-headed and responsible. On a whim, I stopped by where she worked one night to see what she was doing later, and she mentions that the guy all of a sudden says he's flying back today, even though originally he wasn't flying back for another few weeks. He starts claiming that he has no one to pick him up from the airport because his flight is in late, and asked if my friend can. She's a bit unsure about it, but was really excited to meet this guy and decided that airports were safe and that she could go get him. I knew I wasn't going to sway her, and she had been talking with him for so long that I felt a little bit more comfortable with the whole idea. But I told her if she was going to pick up this guy, at least to let me go with her so that she's not alone. I was a teenager. Looking back, yes, very stupid. She agrees and texts him, giving him a heads up that she was bringing a friend. He didn't like that idea. He told her that would be awkward and became very defensive. Then he said his flight was taking off and abruptly stopped responding. Over the next few hours, we sat in a room checking if there was an actual flight leaving from Colorado scheduled, and that everything that he told her added up on paper. That's when we got a very stupid idea. We planned on sitting in the airport with disguises on in the crowd and watch him walk out from the gate. If he looked creepy or odd when he texted her to pick him up, she would respond that she couldn't. And if he looked normal, we would just go back to the car, take off our disguises, and walk back in. We get there very early and find the best hiding spot, and there's plenty of people sitting around, so we wedge ourselves in the back. I even asked the help desk to make sure we were at the right place. We had the flight that he's supposed to be on, and pulled up our phones so that we could see when it lands, etc. We're just killing time back and forth. I'm not a very observant person, so I keep rambling on and don't notice that my friend has turned pale white. She whispers to me in a language that I can only understand, gibberish, that the guy that she's been talking to is sitting next to me. His flight is still 20 minutes away. There's only one seat between him and my friend, and I was sitting in it, and he knew. We casually got up and walked to the restrooms. When I went back out, he was gone. His flight arrived, and nobody even resembling him got off, and he never texted my friend again. For months, I was terrified that he was going to randomly show up. So guy who was trying to abduct my friend, I pray we never meet again. Background. When I was 11, my aunt was very pregnant with her second child. She wound up in the hospital with kidney stones. My mom was the only one in the family who could get the last-minute time off to book a flight to Tennessee as soon as she found out. We left the next morning to help take care of my 1-year-old cousin and stayed until my aunt was better, and then headed back to Omaha. Since we were booking last minute, before booking online was a thing, we ended up with a 5-hour layover in Chicago. I can't remember if it was Midway or O'Hare, but the airport was massive. Now, even at the age of 11, I was a very tall girl and looked a quite bit older than I was. This would become a problem for me in my younger years as far as creepers are concerned. and this was my first, but unfortunately not my last experience with him. So since we had to be in the airport for so long, we decided to kill some time by exploring. This was also before airport security was so strict, but there were still tons of checkpoints to go through in order to go to each part of the airport. We went through them all, shopping, grabbing dinner, just seeing everything this place had to offer. By the third checkpoint or so, I noticed a strange man wearing a hat and a trench coat was behind us, but this was not the first time I had seen him. His clothing looked clean, but underneath it all, he almost looked homeless. He was older, probably hadn't shaved in days, and generally looked out of place. Somehow wrong. I couldn't really pinpoint exactly what it was, but something about him felt strange to me. I realized I had seen him at every checkpoint we had been through so far. I grabbed my mom and told her that I think we were being followed, and she told me that she knew. Apparently, she had noticed him watching me almost immediately and had been taking me through all the checkpoints, trying to lose him. The next security check we went through, he wasn't there, and we thought he had finally gone to catch his flight. We checked around, but he was nowhere to be seen, so we relaxed a little bit and did some shopping. We were in a fairly large store and I was checking out Beanie Babies to see if they had any I didn't have yet. Yeah, I was one of those kids. When I got a strange feeling, I looked up to find my mother, who had been looking for something not too far from me. And when I found her eyes, they were as big as saucers and she looked scared. Then she yelled at the top of her lungs, "Hey, what are you doing? Get away from my daughter." I spun around to find the man standing near me, pretending to look at toys. This all happened in a flash, but he took off as soon as my mom yelled. She grabbed me and we went straight to airport security to report it. I'm not sure if they ever found the man, but they helped us get to our gate where we stayed until our flight left. Now, he never really tried to do anything to me, but according to my mom, when she looked up and saw him close to me, it almost terrified her, and her motherly instincts kicked in and she just yelled. She said she regretted not reporting it the moment she suspected that we were being followed, but she thought maybe she was just being paranoid. It wasn't until after that incident that we decided that we'd always rather to be safe than sorry. It is something I've always tried to live by since. In January, I went to Washington, D.C. with some of my close family friends. Coming from a town of about 11,000 people and never having been to a city even close to D.C. size, I was scared out of my mind that I would get pickpocketed or mugged by someone. TV had led me to believe that big cities like this had absolutely packed streets that were difficult to even walk on, resulting in occurrences such as these. Needless to say, I was relieved when the trip ended without such an incident. At the DC airport, our flight was delayed 3 or 4 times due to weather. By the time we finally got to the Denver, Colorado airport, it was around midnight, preventing us from driving the rest of the way home that night, as we had originally planned. I refused to pee on the airplanes unless absolutely necessary, so when we landed, I had to go. So I, along with my friend's mom, who also had to go, went to the restrooms. When I came out of the stall, I noticed the security lady was now standing beside the door. I had heard no other footsteps come in this completely empty restroom. My ears were actually on alert because the empty airport freaked me out, so this confused me a bit, but I just smiled at her and washed my hands. Approximately 10 seconds later, a toilet flushed. Instead of my friend's mom, a creepy-looking man with a black sweatshirt on, hood up, emerged from the stall. At the sight of the airport employee, he lowered his head quickly and walked out of the restroom. She followed him out, saying, "This is clearly marked a woman's restroom." At the time, probably mostly due to sleep deprivation, I didn't think much of it. But the next day, it really dawned on me. A man wearing a black sweatshirt with the hood up is in a woman's restroom, which was marked with an enormous sign. It was midnight at the airport, and it's practically deserted. Plus, he entered the restroom without a single sound, which for me was the worst part. I don't remember hearing footsteps or extra sounds of urination or anything like that, so I honestly don't think he even used the restroom at all. Rather just pretended to flush the toilet. I repeatedly mentally thanked the security guard for this. I very well could have been kidnapped, murdered, raped, or who knows. He easily could have jumped me. I hadn't even looked back until the security guard spoke to him, but the second I did, I got a very creepy vibe from him, and he didn't even look at me. I never told any of my friend's family, but my mom may have. So that's probably the most frightening thing that's ever happened to my young self. Again, it may not have been the scariest, but it sure scared me. A little bit of backstory beforehand. My parents are divorced. I live primarily in Australia, but travel back to see my father, his family, and my extended family in the UK every chance I could spare. This story revolves around one of those visits. At the time of the visit, I was 13 years old, and due to scheduling conflicts, would be traveling alone without my other sibling. Luckily, most airlines and airports have assistance programs for unaccompanied minors. This includes an identifying tag, escorts throughout the airport, help with check-in, and priority boarding. I was boarded first. My chaperone said goodbye and handed me off to the flight attendants. So far, so good. Nothing of real significance happened for the first few hours of the flight, but I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. I kept feeling the sensation like someone was watching me, but every time I glanced around, I couldn't see the source. I chalked it up to me being a little nervous about flying alone, and tried to watch some flight movies to calm myself down. The next significant event was when I got up to go pee. Now, something caught my eye that hadn't before. There's this man about 4 rows back in the middle aisle seat who was staring at me. He wasn't making any attempt to hide the fact that he was looking at me. And out of shyness, I just looked down and broke our stare and tried to ignore him. As I walked by, I felt like he was almost gesturing me to look at him, as if he wanted to ask me a question. In that moment, I made the decision to ignore him and pretend I hadn't seen him gesture to me. My mom has always been very safety conscious, and I credit her with giving me the healthiest suspicion of strangers. She had made it very clear that while I was traveling alone, I didn't have to answer any adults but the chaperones, and if someone tried to talk to me or make me do something for them, I had permission to ignore them or report them to the airport staff. So that's what I did. I just walked by him, went to the bathroom, and walked back to my seat with my head down. I can't verify whether or not he kept trying to get my attention, but I was a little too freaked out to look back. All I can say is that my creepy, you're being watched senses kept tingling as the flight went on. The bad feeling all came to a head during the sleeping hours of the flight. For those who haven't traveled international long hauls, the sleeping hours are for people to sleep by simulating nighttime on the plane. That means no trolley service, dim lights, and all the airline screens are shut off. I was very groggy and sleep deprived at this time. I probably should have tried to get some rest, but I couldn't get comfortable, and I was just trying to ride out the time by watching movies. This is when he approached me. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed, then said something that I didn't hear because I had my headphones on. I removed them and turned to give him my groggy but full attention. Sorry? Will you come to the back of the plane with me, please? I was confused by this question. Have I done something? No, I would just like you to come to the back of the plane with me. He crouched down to be eye level with me, glancing back to the end of the plane, which was dark, behind a curtain, and the only bathroom is vacant. I have money. He pulls out his wallet and shows me a wad of cash. If you'd like some. I just want to talk to you in the back of the plane. It would just be for a moment. I was very confused as what he wanted to do when this was happening. Looking back, I remember feeling annoyed, less afraid of danger, and more irritated about being asked to stop watching a movie and do something. Due to my tired state, it wasn't connecting that I might have been in danger. I was just being asked to talk to this guy about something. I wonder if he might have convinced me with a little more prodding, but luckily he didn't get any further. A woman behind me, who I realized later was listening in the entire conversation, pulled down her eye mask, leaned over between the seat gap and said, "She isn't interested. You need to go back to your seat right now, or I'll call a flight attendant." I've never seen a man move so fast. He tucked his wallet away and scurried back to his seat, slid his eye mask on, and rotated away from us so we wouldn't see his face. She turned her attention to me and said, "If he comes back over, wake me up or call for a flight attendant. If you need to use the restroom, use the one in the center of the plane. It's more well lit." She reaches through and rests her hand on my shoulder. I give a "thank you," and she leans back into her seat but keeps her eye mask off, shooting looks in the man's direction. Near the last few hours of the flight, I didn't feel uneasy or like I was being watched anymore. The woman, who was traveling with her 2 kids, kept leaning in and asking me questions about where I was going, who was picking me up from the airport, etc. When she discovers that I'm meeting my extended family at the terminal, her face clears and she offers to walk me out to the baggage claim. We land, get off the plane, and when I saw my father at luggage claim, I wave her a fond goodbye, then thank her and walk off. As for the guy, I have no idea what happened. The encounter was so bizarre and short that I might have just discarded it away from memory immediately. Looking back though, I always feel apprehension and dread at what his intentions were. I have so many theories, but I'm glad I didn't get put in a position to find out. To the woman who saved me, you are my hero. Only wish I could thank you properly for looking out for me. To the man who propositioned me on the plane, let's not meet again. A little bit of background. My dad frequently travels for his job and has accumulated a lot of miles through Delta. Both he and my mom bought me a ticket with their miles as an early Christmas present from Oregon to Montana to spend time with my boyfriend during his finals week, since my finals were finished a week before his. Luckily, we drove back to Oregon together for his winter break, so I didn't have to deal with the hassle of flying back. This was my first flight completely alone, and the only occasion that I'll fly out to see my boyfriend, because he always drives back home during his school breaks. I had a 2.5-hour layover in Salt Lake City, Utah, before flying out to Montana. During this time, I kept myself occupied by sitting alone somewhat close to where my gate was and charging my phone while browsing Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. I was sitting at a table against the wall where you could look out the window and see airplanes that were parked or getting ready to taxi. There were tables lined up against this wall, and they were mostly filled with 1 or 2 people, and there were large decorative plants between every couple tables. As I was sitting there, this man approached me, probably in his mid-20s. He wasn't very tall, had a dark coat on, carried a backpack, and there was something very off about his demeanor. I didn't notice until I looked at him in the eyes and saw that they were not aligned. Knowing how people can't help how they look, I was friendly when he said hello and introduced himself. He held out 2 of his fingers so I could shake them, which was already odd. He sat down at one of the chairs facing me and put his backpack on the ground against the chair leg. He kept pointing to the airplanes and muttering numbers under his breath, either about the model they were or God knows what. His voice was slurred and it was difficult to understand. I politely smiled and pretended to be interested and then resumed scrolling through my phone. He told me that I was beautiful and asked if I had a boyfriend. I said yes, and he asked if we lived together. I said no and told him that I was on my way to see him. The guy asked where my boyfriend is, and I told him that he's in Montana for school. Not once did I tell this guy where I'm from. He asked if we're doing a long distance, and I said yes, knowing it's only temporary until my boyfriend graduates in May. The guy then proceeds to tell me that I'm wasting my time and money doing long distance, and even goes as far to say that we'll break up. This made me angry because this guy knew nothing about our situation and had no business telling me anything about my relationship. I looked him in the eye and told him to leave. He asked me why, and I told him I don't want him here. He kept trying to say crap about my relationship, and I kept firmly asking him to leave, getting to the point where I was panicking and yelling. People walking by were starting to look over at us, which made me even more nervous because I don't like to draw attention to myself in public. The guy finally picked up his bag and told me that he will leave, as well as he doesn't know why I'm mad. He reaches his 2 fingers out so I could shake them goodbye, and I screamed, "Don't touch me." He told me that I was being stupid as he stood up, and the last thing he said before I walked away was, "Good luck on the breakup." I told him to shut up, and he said something I don't remember as he walked away. I immediately called my boyfriend crying and told him what just happened, and then called my mom. My mom said I should have just gotten up and walked away, and if he followed me, I could have got security. In the moment, it was hard for me to remember my options. Later on, as I walked to the gate, I saw him talking to another girl by herself and introduced himself in the same way. I have no idea what he was doing in this airport. I don't want to assume any mental problems this guy had, or if he was under the influence of something, but this terrified me. My boyfriend and I are still happily together, so suck it, creepy airport guy. And let's never meet again. Edit. I'm aware that I may have overshared some details about my boyfriend with him. I think in the heat of the moment I assumed that if he knew about my boyfriend, he would leave me alone. Instead, he kept pushing, which I wasn't prepared for, and assumed that if I gave him vague answers, he would eventually leave. The whole interaction was so unexpected that I didn't know how to respond, but looking back, I can think of so many I should haves. But this was a good learning experience, so I hope next time anything like this happens again, I will respond quickly and get the hell out of there.